welcome to this Devil is the Data session. We're extremely pleased to discuss the topic with you today. It's a privilege. I'm very glad to introduce the panelists. Eliane Schutt, who is the CEO of Xeltis. We're going to present the activities in a moment. Then we have Laurent van der Broek, who is the CEO of Chronolife. Ian Crosby, CEO of Sequana Medical, and last but not least, Marc Julien, who is the co-CEO of Diabeloop. We have 45 minutes. I'm the timekeeper here, so what I propose now, without any delay, is to start with 2 minutes each to present your product. We thought we're not going to describe the companies by themselves. You know, you have internet, you can check them out. But we have been talking about digital therapeutics for now, more than one day. We wanted to be very concrete, so we'll start with 2 minutes per panelist to discuss their service, their device, so that we know very clearly what it is. Eliane, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone in the audience. So Xeltis indeed has a technology, a restorative technology that allows the body to heal itself. So what we make through devices, but the devices will degrade as they are implanted and will be replaced by patient's own tissue. And it has great benefits. We're concentrating on heart valves and vessels, so we're making artificial vessels, and one in particular of interest is a dialysis shunt, a graft that allows patients to be on dialysis machines, patients that have severe chronic kidney disease that need to be going to the hospital twice a week to be punctured in their vein, in the graft, to allow the toxic components to be removed. So we're going to talk about that because we are a true implant company, but data capturing is of essence as well for our technology to make a success.
Thank you, Eliane. Outstanding. So now, Laurent, if you can tell us about Chronolife, your products.
Thank you, Jerome. So Chronolife is both a Medtech and a service operator, in the sense that we operate our own service platform that collect the data and make it available to the healthcare provider. As you have noticed, we are headquartered in France. The mission of the organization is to deliver continuous and multi-parametric monitoring of patients with chronic disease or persons at risk in real-life conditions. That's very important. Through smart textile, healthcare certified smart textile that can be a t-shirt or a bra or whatever, with a certain number of patented technologies that we have to integrate electronic in a smart textile so that the textile can be fully washable and very comfortable. And we do that with two objectives. First, to improve the quality of life of the patient, but also his or her adherence to the healthcare protocol. And the second objective of what we do is really to deliver a set of comprehensive data to the healthcare provider to allow them to do an accurate diagnostic of the health evolution of the health status of the patients once discharged from the hospital, and that do need to be remotely monitored.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laurent. Private joke between us. Ian, 2 minutes to tell us a lot about Sequana Medical.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation. So Sequana, we are focused on the treatment of diuretic-resistant fluid overload. Most of you probably don't know what that means, but fluid overload is a major problem of heart failure, liver failure, kidney failure, cancer. And standard of care is diuretics. They're cheap, they're effective, they've been around for decades, and we're not trying to replace them. The problem is that in a good proportion of patients, maybe 10%, they no longer work. And when that happens, it's a big problem for patients. Two focus areas for us. The first is heart failure, where we believe we have the ability to treat diuretic-resistant congestion. We can slow down the progression of heart failure, and we can significantly reduce costs and improve outcomes for patients. The second aspect is in liver disease, where we treat a condition called refractory ascites. This is a problem where the liver starts to leak, and the liver can lose about 1 liter of fluid a day into the abdomen. And with this high-tech implantable pump, we can transform the outcomes for these patients. what we do is we automatically and continuously pump the fluid from the abdominal cavity into the bladder, where the patient just simply urinates it away. We are stopping their visits to hospital every 2 weeks, and we're reducing this accumulation of 10 to 15 litres of fluid in their abdomen, and we're allowing these patients to go back to a relatively normal life. So that's the content of Sequana.
Yeah, and just a comment as a former physician, when I was a student in gastroenterology as a young intern, our responsibility every morning was to go around the ward, checking on the patient that had a very big belly because it was a foot of fluid, and we would have to remove manually with a syringe the liquid. That was cumbersome. That was also only once a day or once every other day. You're talking about a continuous drainage, which is great.
Yeah, these patients have a miserable life, and no one cares when it's an alcoholic. Everybody cares when it's a NASH patient, and NASH is transforming the face of cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is going to go from a disease of the outcast to a disease of the middle class, and that is driven by NASH, where obesity is socially acceptable. Food abuse is allowed, is positively encouraged, but alcohol abuse is still frowned upon. So that is going to transform social attitudes to cirrhosis going forward.
Thank you. Mark, Diabeloop.
So at Diabeloop, what we do is we are a software company, and what we do is we've developed a software that can automate and personalize the treatment for patients with diabetes. Basically, we collect the data from a continuous glucose monitoring system. With that information, we can calculate the right amount of insulin that a patient needs every 5 minutes and give the order to the insulin pump to deliver that insulin to the patient, meaning that the patient doesn't have to do anything anymore, doesn't have to worry about how much insulin he needs to inject himself or herself during the day and during the night. Because when you've got diabetes, there's no holidays, no nights, no days where you don't have to think about what's going on. And as we all know, if the treatment and the amount of insulin that a patient deliver to himself or herself, there's huge consequences short term with hypoglycemia, which sadly can lead to coma or to death during the night most of the time, or all those comorbidity and complications that diabetes may put on people, like foot problems or amputations, kidney problems, dialysis, or heart problems, or blindness. And so that's what we try to avoid and give back the life to the patients.
Great, thank you so much. Let's dive into the topic we're looking at today, which is how to optimize a data asset. Laurent, if I were coming back to you, would you describe the type of data that you collect and the usage of the data?
Yeah. So the first version, the first healthcare certified T-shirt that we now commercialize, combine a T-shirt that generates 6 physiological data: an electrocardiogram, thoracic respiration, abdominal respiration, pulmonary impedance, activity, temperature. These data are transferred through the smartphone of the patient and transferred through Wi-Fi, 3G or 4G to our servers. Of course, the objective of RPM, the objective of remote patient monitoring, is not to, I would say, bombard the physician with data, with continuous and multiparametric data. So at the level of our company, we combine this raw data into healthcare indicators so that we can really provide tools for decision, for diagnostics, to the physician, to the healthcare provider inside the hospitals, and that do need to remotely monitor the patients with chronic disease. We focus today on several pathologies: chronic heart failure, respiratory disease, long COVID included, because as you know, 35% of the patients after a major COVID event do need long-term follow-on. And also in oncology. But I think what is very important in RPM, if we want RPM to be a success, we need first to make sure that the medical device is very simple to use, but we need also to provide to the healthcare provider web portals through which they can define threshold, define limits, so that when an indicator is exceeded, when a threshold of an indicator is exceeded, an alarm is generated, and validate the alarm, if possible, before transmitting this alarm to the healthcare provider. For me, that will be the only way to succeed in remote patient monitoring. It's really to provide tools for decisions to the healthcare provider.
Now, let me dive a second on that, and then we'll collect your thoughts collectively. But again, as a physician, I've been working during the COVID period, following patients at home for the French government, and we were using a device. The people with COVID were entering actually health data. It was generating alerts at the start. We, the physicians on the phone, were supposed to call back the patients, and we discovered there was a very high rate of wrong alarms, wrong alerts. So we very quickly switched to nurses being able to call back the patients, and only the real alerts were coming back to us. Is that something that you have been looking at, or you were thinking about when you said that type of triage of alerts?
Yeah, that's really key. If we want RPM to be a success, that's really key. First of all, to train the patient for the use of the RPM solutions, of the remote patient monitoring service, but also to have nurses and have a service provider that follow on, the patient, and can, once an alarm is generated, validate this alarm before transferring it to the physicians. Otherwise, we will provide additional workload to the physician, which is absolutely not the objective of remote patient monitoring.
You overwhelm the healthcare professionals, and they may not actually prescribe the system. Ian, you have also a very interesting approach to data analysis, including compliance with the system, which is also very interesting for reimbursement purpose. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, great. Now, we've got 3 levels at which we collect data. So what we do today is this device lives inside the body and has to be recharged on a daily basis, about 20 minutes, sorry. Every time it's recharged, we collect the data from the device, it gets sent back to our servers. And the key data we analyze today is pump performance data is important for us as a company to understand how the pumps are performing, but we also monitor patient compliance because we monitor how often are these patients charging. As I mentioned today, a lot of it is hepatitis, it's alcohol, and increasingly NASH. Compliance with charging is a key parameter. These patients are very sick. A decompensated cirrhotic is one of the nastiest patients Jerome and his colleagues would ever have to deal with there. And we politely call it compliance, which generally means getting back on the alcohol again. So if a patient stops charging, they often become non-compliant, which is an early warning system to doctors that something has happened. They may have started drinking, they need to be back on. They may have got some other medical complication, so they can't charge. It's just an alert mechanism today that the doctor needs to get back in contact. Secondly, during our pivotal trial, we have determined that there's a very close correlation between kidney injuries, where if you've got a messed up liver, you've got a messed up kidney. There's a very close correlation between kidney injury and changes in volume pumped. And we monitor volume pumped very closely. So we can tell when there's a change in volume pumped. And if there is, we are now going to be able to alert the physician that they need to bring the patient in, they need to deal with albumin to replace some of that lost protein, and thereby reduce the complications of these patients. So very near term, we're moving from just compliance towards improving outcomes by potentially improving the outcomes for kidney injury. And going forward, infection of this fluid, the ascites, spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, is a big problem for these patients. We pump 100% of this fluid through the abdomen. When we develop a monitoring device within the pump that will pick up infection monitors, we'll be able to give an advanced view of pending infection of this fluid. This puts these patients in intensive care normally for between 3 to 4 days. So if we can pick up an impending marker, get these patients put onto IV antibiotics first, we should be able to avert that admission, reduce cost, improve outcomes. So we have kind of a 3-phase approach. We're dealing with simple compliance today, then we're improving clinical outcomes, and going forward, we're going to be improving outcomes for patients, reducing hospital costs. So, and beyond that, frankly, anything you can monitor, we can hook up to this device going forward. We have power and communications inside the body, but we think very tangibly today, but going forward, we think more excitingly about what we can do for whole disease monitoring outcomes here.
You know, this is very interesting because when you think about, there's a theme of a virtual ward. NHS talks about it a lot at the moment. Again, back to my experience, and yes, it was 40 years ago. But as I said, you had to use a needle to get to the liquid in the abdomen. Then you had to test that, so you had to take that to the lab. Once in a while, because of what you were doing, you were getting an infection in the patient. That was very time-consuming, resource-consuming. It was also hospital-based. Now we're talking about patients being at home. Such a device is actually getting everything streamlined. You're saving patients' lives through the technology. I would like now to ask Mark, because interestingly enough, you're not the recording device. You analyze data. So we're really in the forefront. You have an algorithm. We would love to learn more about it because you go one step further, I guess.
Yeah, but what we do is, of course, we collect the data and then we see what's the how the patient is behaving and what's the complications the patient may have, and we, as all of us, transfer that data on the server and propose to the patient and the doctors to have a look at the data. But what we do is we actually are therapeutic software, whereas we actually have an action on the treatment of the patient, and where the patient used to inject himself and take the decision of how much insulin I need at that specific point of time, understanding of his or her glucose level in the bloodstream, depending on the activity or the lunch or whatever happened before and what's going to happen in the future. They had to take the decision of how much insulin and when. We actually take that responsibility as a software, and we do with artificial intelligence, which is a buzzword, but the technology inside is a bit more complex than that. We actually take a decision every 5 minutes of how much insulin the patient needs and when, and then depending on that decision, we give the order to the pump to deliver that insulin without the patient or the doctor intervention at all. So the system analyze the data, do the math, and then take the decision for the patients, depending on his physiology and his or her activities or lunch.
And if I can pursue a little bit on that artificial intelligence, from what I understand, you told us that you have actually created also a patient algorithm, a type of patient. When we're looking at the title here, it says, a world patient-centric approach. Yep. You have actually, if I understand, created a virtual patient to test some of your systems. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So what we've done is as we were getting more data from patients, of course during clinical trials or real life usage of the solution, we've managed to start building some virtual patients, and those patients allowed us to test our algorithm, and making sure that when we are putting this algorithm or this artificial intelligence in the run for clinical trials or for usage, we have tested it on virtual patients before, and of course those patients you can test the extremes and sometimes sadly kill those virtual patients, but it doesn't matter because they're virtual, right? And so it helps us to accelerate the innovation, accelerate the testing, make the system safer, and of course reduce the cost of clinical trial, because that means we don't need to do and test the system in situations where first it would be expensive to test because it would make patient take some risk, and it's expensive to keep the patient at hospital during clinical trial, but also it's more ethical because that means you don't put the patient at risk during clinical trial, which is something you don't want to do. So yes, we have developed that ability and technology, and we are one of the very few in the world in our industry to have that, and we are planning to actually get even FDA approved that solution. And as you said, we are very patient focused, and so we work with the patients to understand what they do and put that into our models.
Well, thank you very much. Eliane, your device doesn't collect data yet. Maybe
Correct.
one day, you
Yes.
never know. Yet data is very important for you. Would you, tell us a little bit about what are your needs and concern about data collection? I guess we're not talking about the research part before commercialization, but rather after the graft has been implanted. What type of data do you need and do you plan to collect?
Yes, so indeed we're in clinical phase, and what our implant does is basically provide better outcomes for patients. Because if the graft doesn't occlude, then also the patients will live longer, and subsequently less interventions will happen, less cost to society. So the benefits are there utilizing our grafts, but how do we demonstrate this? And it's quite interesting with a dialysis graft like ours that is restorative in nature, that there's multiple customers here. It's in fact, of course, we want to help patients and improve patients' outcomes. That's the primary goal. But at the same time, we also have to realize once we implant the graft, it's the vascular surgeon that does it. That needs to be, understood, and it needs to be for the surgeon a successful attempt. But subsequently, these patients will come back to the dialysis center twice a week, where the nephrologist takes over, where successful dialysis is key to the outcome of our graft, and successful outcomes to show that our graft is functioning. So the nephrology is the second customer to the whole chain of benefit to the patient. But in addition, the nurses that puncture these grafts twice a week, they should have a benefit to allow the grafts to succeed in the long run as well. So there's multiple customers here around our grafts, and there's multiple players that eventually have play a significant role in the successful outcome of the graft. So to capture data is extremely important beyond just the implant. It's also about the lifestyle of these patients, right? I mean, are these patients behaving well? Are they following a correct protocol to make sure that dialysis is indeed successful? Are nurses happy when they start puncturing these grafts in the right way, that the graft remains durable? So things like, it sounds simple, but the fact that we're now capturing data around nurses puncturing the graft is very important, because we're finding out that there's no bleeding when the graft is being punctured twice a week, which also means patients can go home faster. And imagine if you have your taxi waiting, right? These patients have to go there for dialysis for hours, and then they want to go home. If there is then subsequently, after puncturing, significant bleeding where they have to wait another half hour, this is major impact. So capturing all of that data is important, and in the future there's lots of development happening to improve patients' outcome, which means patients will go home and have puncturing maybe done themselves. So imagine how important then data capturing will be to make sure they're doing this successfully in a correct way, but also have their lifestyle corrected and controlled a bit, so we have successful outcomes. So there's a lot still to be developed, and it's an exciting field, and we're just at the beginning of it.
And so, if I understand, there are two data issues here. One is what's called PRO, the patient-reported outcome, and then you could have the bleeding, the quality of life for the patients. Another one I heard is hospital process optimization, where if you have to wait to make sure you don't have a bleeding and you wait, let's say, 15 minutes or half an hour, it means all the patients that are coming for a dialysis, they're going to spend half an hour there, which somehow, if you can reduce that to nothing because you have proved that you have no bleeding with your device, you're saving 30 minutes per patient. If you have, let's say, 10 patients, then you're saving 5 hours of room time for other patients. You can increase the activity of the department, so quite interesting.
Absolutely.
If I, following on data and optimizing data asset, if I go back to you, Laurent, and we will address also the issues with the others, as you know, from statistics, if you do not have enough patients, your data may not be as reliable, and that's not to say worthless. So the value here is on the scale up, not only from a data standpoint, but also from a business standpoint, right? You have great innovations, you need to sell it. How do you deal with that? How do you go from a proof of concept to scale up, local, even global?
Well, as we talk here about RPM, about remote patient monitoring, I'm used to say that RPM will be scalable and will be a success the day the patient will forget is remotely monitored. For me, that's the first CSF, critical success factor, in order for RPM to succeed. And on the other way around, need to provide, as I was saying, a set of comprehensive data that allow an accurate diagnostic to the tools for diagnostic to the healthcare provider, allowing the healthcare provider to focus on the patients that do need care and not the others. That's also very important. And the third criteria for scalability and for the success of RPM is interoperability. I was the other day in a hospital, in a customer that want to remotely monitor patients with chronic heart failure. And so our typical first question is, do you already use a web portal for RPM? Do you already have active patients and protocol in place for RPM? And this hospital had in place 3 different web portals and solutions for different use cases and diseases, and to follow different pathologies of patients with chronic disease. That will not work. I mean, this business will never become scalable if there is no if we do not force for interoperability at the level of the medical device integration in the service platform, but also at the level of the provision of the data for their integration in the web portal and information system of the hospital. For me, that's the 3 elements that are key in order to see scalability of this of RPM.
Ian, you have a special approach to onboarding patients and to scalability. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's a very simple one, which is really keep it simple. We're going from a business which has got tens or hundreds of patients in Europe, and we're planning to go to thousands in the US. And as I said, we collect this data from the devices every time it's charged. It comes to the company, we review it, we process it, and we present it to the clinicians. That's very labor intensive, and our plan is not to change a thing. In the near term, the only thing the US capital markets care about is revenue growth. So we have to come up with the simplest possible business model, eliminate all risk associated with scale up of the business. And it's much easier just to add more people than trying to go through the complexity of some sort of machine learning or artificial intelligence, or trying to go through some complex regulatory or business risk. So our approach is very simple, whether it comes to manufacturing, or whether it comes to distribution, or whether it comes to data processing. We're just going to do what we are today, but on a bigger scale. It may sound dumb, but until the capital markets value us in a different way, which is reliability of revenue growth, we're going to do this in the simplest manner. As we get to thousands of these devices, we will in parallel invest in how we can learn by looking at the data. We'll have machine learning, etc. We'll come up with simple algorithms, but in the near term, it's going to be what I call kind of the concierge service. We'll have this high-touch, high-value approach that demonstrates the value to the clinicians, that demonstrates the value in terms of the outcomes. Keep it simple, high burden, high number of people, high cost, yes, but while we drive revenues on a reliable basis, it doesn't matter. So for now, nothing clever, just going replicating what we do on a larger scale.
Yeah, it's music to my ears. As a provider of search services, I would imagine you're considering outsourcing some of those activities, aren't you?
Yeah, we will. And as we figure the ability to train, we'll have to figure out, because managing people is a hard aspect there. So whatever is the simplest one.
And it may not be strategic for a company that is actually focused on innovation rather than promotion.
Yeah, the manual we write will be proprietary, but actual answering the phones is not.
I love that. I will quote that on you. Mark, would you remind me, at least in, let's say in Europe, because you have a European market. Yeah. In Europe, how many diabetics?
If you look at the number of patients with type 1, which are the one that we are currently equipping, is about 2 million patients.
That's in Europe, or is it France?
That's in Europe. France is 10%, is 200,000.
Okay, so 2 million people.
Yeah.
Again, same question. You know, we were talking here about, you know, connecting with consumers, which, by the way, consumers are not only, you know, the patients. There are, you know, healthcare professionals, payers. Sometime we'll come back maybe to it. How do you manage the deployment of your system, the onboarding of patients, medical teams, the onboarding of patients when you have 2 million customers? And I'm only talking about the patients here.
Yeah, and just to give you a sense of the challenge that we are facing is that we really started commercialization last year, and we are now having thousands of patients, you know, a little short of 10,000 of patients equipped in Europe, all across Europe, and for us, of course, being a startup, it's a massive challenge. It's a massive challenge for patient reach. The good news, well, you know, is that the patients with diabetes type 1 are very well structured and organized, and so in terms of scale up to reach them, it's not that difficult. We use social media, and we've got a very focused marketing activity around social media and promoters around there, just to make sure that they know what we do. We respond to what they ask, and interact with them. And you know, just a couple days ago, we were having over 200 patients and doctors on the web seminar to describe them and to respond to their questions. So those are the patients on the patient side. Of course, once people are equipped, they've got complaints or they've got questions. And so for the moment, we're using both our partners' service, but also our internal service. But as you were saying, at some point, there will be too much for us to manage. And of course, it's not our business to actually do that. So we will be probably outsourcing some of that activity to some people that can help us manage those activities, even if we keep some internally. Of course, there's as you said, to scale up, you need to reach to the KOL and you need to reach to the doctors and nurses.
I'm sorry, KOL, the key opinion leaders.
Yeah, key opinion leaders. Sorry, and to do that, we've got a team internally that is actually, training those doctors and training those nurses, and to help them do that, we've actually developed some e-training systems where they can go on the website, they can get actually access to material, and then can interact with it, so that they can get to learn how to use our system, and then come back to us if they've got questions. So scalability for us is a massive challenge, because we're moving again from 0 patients equipped to tens of thousands of patients within a year, which, as you can imagine, for a company like us is, as you were saying, we were focused on doing the algorithm and not actually managing patients. So it's a big challenge, and we're putting tools to help do that.
Sorry, just to interrupt on that one. There's one thing we found very interesting is YouTube. And the Americans, the first thing they reach for is YouTube. So forget the IFU, forget the training tools. If you don't know how to do something, they'll just Google it, and that's the first line. It's very hard from an FDA perspective. You have to think very carefully about how you create those videos, but it's probably the most effective customer service tool there is.
Yeah, the issue, of course, being the regulation, because sometimes you're allowed to have an IFU that is, or training materials that are on the internet, and sometimes you just need to print it, which is a huge cost and useless cost, really, because nobody looks at it. But for regulation purposes, you need to print a 300 pages document that is useless and actually not convenient to work with. But
Eliane, you have different customers, as we said, and you have, as all providers of medical devices or products, you have an issue of share of voice with those prescribers. How do you do it? And how do you divide your attention between the physicians who are going to implant your device and the nephrologists who are going to use it?
Yeah, and all of it is very important, right? As I mentioned, including the patient behavior itself. So it is initially, of course, in a clinical trial, your primary attention goes to the vascular surgeon, so that he has an optimal surgery for this patient. So this is where we train the surgeon really well. Although the graft is very much like other typical grafts, it's still important to train them really well. So we're using also modules like training systems that are on YouTube and alike. So I think this is very important. Then for nephrologists and nurses, it is important to see how do we puncture these grafts in a correct fashion, so that it is also not very out of the normal way of practice. At the same time, facilitates their, the usage of needles and alike. So this is how we try to be very close to nurses and nephrologists as well, to listen really carefully. What is standard practice? How can we make their life easier and make benefit to their lives as well? Because this is just also a marketing story, right? We just don't want, not only it's important to have better outcomes for patients, but also make lives of nurses and nephrologists better, so they don't see patients coming back that need interventions all the time that could have been avoided. So we're listening really well to nephrologists. Actually, in our pivotal trial design, nephrologists and nurses play a key role in designing this and also figuring out what data can we capture, because ultimately it's great to capture data, but we cannot overload them with requests. So imagine if we want to ask for every dialysis session the time to hemostasis. I mean, that would be a tremendous burden too. So we have to figure out what is a right level of capturing data that helps us and helps nurses, at the same time not bringing an overkill that they feel it's not useful anymore. So it's finding the right balance is important.
Yeah, it's the old acronym of DRIP, data rich information.
Absolutely.
For those of you who are interested, I would recommend there is a McKinsey publication on patient loves health apps. Physicians, not so much, so look at it. Time is running up. I would like to address a quick topic here before opening to questions. Laurent, you're generating a lot of data. Who owns that data?
We are used to say to the patient. Yeah. It belongs to the patient. I always have the question from the hospitals with that prescribe our solutions for the remote monitoring of patients with chronic heart failure and other disease. And what is important is that the patient gives his consent or her consent for the use of this data.
GDPR.
In line with GDPR, in line with GDPR compliant. Yeah, in Europe for the case of Europe, yeah. So that this data then can be used for diagnostic, for remote monitoring and for accurate diagnostic, but it belongs to the patient. Yeah.
Okay, Ian, a different perspective.
So
you have been quiet. Usually you're more provocative. You have been bringing a lot of fun to our previous discussions. We have 8 minutes for you to be very provocative here.
I'm well behaved on this group. So yeah. So what would you like me to be provocative about? But I think collecting data and actually monetizing it rather than we collect data and then what the hell do we do with it? We were talking earlier about quality of life and the aspect of that, and does anyone care? We care, patients care, doctors probably care, payers in the most part probably don't care. You look at the payers, you look at all of the collection when it comes to medical devices. We collect all this lovely data and the payers just say, well, how many dollars are you going to save me versus standard of care? I think it matters when it comes to marketing. You've obviously got the publications which are talking about clinical outcomes, but if quality of life on validated questionnaires is becoming increasingly relevant here. So I think you have to think a bit about what does it take to get approved is one thing. What does it take to get paid? And then you have to think about in the marketplace when you're competing against technologies. You were describing our key competition, which is drainage. 40 years ago, that's like a second ago in time, because this was developed 2,000 years ago and hasn't changed at all since. So we have to compete with a properly ingrained standard of care. So that's an area where you start building a marketing message more almost along the lines of consumer marketing. It may be a secondary endpoint in a study, but actually when it comes to talking in the doctor's office or the doctor talking to the family or to the patient, it becomes a very, very high point here. So patient, that's one aspect here. Patient preference is, I think, fascinating when it comes to data as well. FDA is taking a very different attitude now towards patient preference, and we love it. The FDA historically has been the judge and jury on these decisions, what's good and what's bad. And they don't know. They're dumb. They've never asked a patient what's important. And we're doing a patient preference study asking patients about what level of risk, what level of reintervention are you willing to take. There's a very famous obesity study that was done asking very sort of morbidly obese patient, what level of risk would you take if you could eat whatever you wanted in life? And they were willing to have a 10% risk of death to have that pill. So we have to start asking patients what's important.
Great. Yeah, Mark, and 1 minute also if you comment, and then on the Artificial Intelligence Act.
Yeah, just 1 minute. I think nobody likes data. I think, as you were saying, the idea is that our system are there to have people forget about the data, and so they can, go back to actually dealing with the people. And it's true for patients. It's also true for doctors. I mean, what the doctors want is to have a real connection with the patient when they interact with the patient, and forget about technology. And our technology are there to be forgotten, and so that patients or doctors have a real life and real interactions. Thank you for bringing the AI Act from Europe. I think all our technology are based around artificial intelligence in long term, and we need to make sure that the regulation we put in place or the system we put in place allow us to do innovation, allow us to move forward on those. Because if we don't do it in Europe, it will be imposed on. It's no matter of whether it's going to be imposed on us from countries that won't care about the patients, won't care about privacy, won't care about what we decide, and people tell me, well, but Mark, regulation will stop them. Well, I have a bad news for you, for everybody here. Regulation don't stop patients using system. In the world, there is a DIY solution for patients with diabetes type 1 that can be used. It's actually complex to use. It's not regulated, and over 10,000 patients are using it, and especially some in Europe. So regulation won't stop patients using system that helps them. We need to make sure that those systems are safe, and so have a regulation that make them safe to use those systems, but not stop innovation in our countries.
Great point. Thank you so much. We have, it says here 4 minutes but before we started a little bit earlier, so I think we have 5 or 6 minutes. Would you have questions, please, in the room for, we have very bright, knowledgeable speakers here. Do you have questions for them? Okay, well, I have a question for them. I'll start with Ian. Can you tell us about how do you get reimbursement? How do you, get the payers, whether they are public payers, private payers, even the individuals? How do you define prices, and how do you make sure you get paid?
Let's focus on the US, the only one that really matters to us out here. Obviously, inpatient procedure, so it's DRGs. We've got ICD-10 coding already, so we have the DRGs, so we have the reimbursement set there already. Obviously, we're looking to get paid more, and that's part of an asset with NTAP, which is a really good initiative by CMS, so Medicare combined with FDA, trying to provide higher reimbursement for products that can actually demonstrate value to the payer there. When it comes to data and reading data, US doctors will do nothing they don't get paid for. If you can send them the data, but if they're not getting paid, they won't look at it. So now COVID is changing attitudes there, where now telemedicine was not used pre-COVID. It was always said 70-year-olds can't do telemedicine. 70-year-olds are FaceTiming now because of COVID, and that means doctors can do remote meetings and therefore get paid for it. If we are demonstrating from our trial that we can reduce kidney injuries by better monitoring of volumes. If the FDA tells us that the monitoring of volumes is key, we can then tell the payers that monitoring volumes is key, and therefore doctors can get paid for reading that. And if they can get paid for reading it, we can get paid for sending it. So this is kind of the trickle down here, but COVID has accelerated remote monitoring and has remote tele sessions dramatically. And I think that's really exciting as to where it goes. So the first part is easy, the second part is harder, but allows us to create kind of pay-as-you-go models.
Eliane, 1 minute, and maybe since you're at the early stage of your company, you may be interested also in, capital investment rather than payers. How do you promote to VCs your device and the promise you're offering?
So this has very much has to be a story on the improvements that we bring, and improvements not just to that we're bringing something to the market that is better, but also it reduces cost. So the health economic story is tremendously important, which has to do in our story with a reduction in intervention, with a more durable graft that is obviously reducing costs, but also, as we just said, right, simple things like reducing nursing time, and all of this, if we can demonstrate this, will bring interest to VC that we have something that can be high priced, or at least priced that is in a significant way giving revenues that are interesting to the VC and see some return on investment. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Laurent, how do you market, and how do you get reimbursed or how do you monetize your service?
First, I would like rapidly to come back on what Ian is saying.
Go ahead, challenge Ian.
No, I do not want to challenge him. I agree with him that, COVID-19 crisis has been a great accelerator for the adoption of remote patient monitoring. I was used to hear the hospital saying before the COVID-19 crisis, why do you want that I adopt RPM where I'm paid but for the use of my bed in the hospital? I do not hear that anymore. So it's an important change. One point on reimbursement in Europe, and that's an issue we didn't discuss, is the fact that the market is totally fragmented and different country by country regarding the rules for reimbursement. In France, we are lucky in the sense that we have already a decree and a law for the reimbursement of remote patient monitoring services, where both the service provider and the physician are paid for the prescription of RPM. So that's a good thing. Now we need to make sure that the flat rate that will be reimbursed at a good level to cover all our costs, which is another challenge, but it goes in the right direction.
Mark, maybe the last words about reimbursement. Are you reimbursed enough? Is it easy to get reimbursed at European level? Since you
first, I cannot disagree with what Laurent said. I mean, it's a nightmare to have 27 system. I mean, we are an old continent, as the US would say, with all our different systems, health system and payments, of course. No, I think the major challenge for our industry in the medtech, I mean, is that people were used to pay for hardware, and now they will have to pay for software, for data, for services, and this is a completely change of mind for them. Completely change of mind also for regulation, because our systems are evolutive systems, so we can update, we can upgrade, and for the payer and for the regulator, this is a completely new paradigm, and this is a major challenge. In some countries, they understand that. You said France, there's the Germany with the DIGA system, but when we are a software that comes on top of a hardware, it's extremely difficult to, in some instances, to actually get the premium for the service you provide, because of course the hardware manufacturer try to sell more hardware than software, and therefore they tend to give away the service of the software instead of valuing that. And we all know that in the long run, the hardware will be a commodity, and the software is where the value will stand.
Outstanding. Thanks for those final words. Please join me to thank very much our panelists.